The 2024 season has featured a plethora of injuries for the Saints, and unfortunately, it's going to feature at least one more. Derek Carr, we just got some word on his injury. We'll talk about that and what's going on for the Saints right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Rosvoglu, and as always, the Straight Up Saints podcast is brought to you by Scott McNair Injury Lawyers. If you've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott McNair handles it all. You give them a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. So the Saints did win yesterday against the Giants, albeit really, really ugly win, one that you don't exactly brag about to your friends after the game's over. But in that game, they did lose Derek Carr to an injury. We all saw him kind of go full-on Jeff Hardy, swanton bombing over the Giants' defense just to land really hard on his left wrist. Was on the floor for a while, and then it was reported that the Saints were looking into a concussion and also a hand injury. So today, it initially gets reported by Ian Rappaport that Derek Carr suffered a significant fracture in his non-throwing hand, and he tweeted, he's expected to miss several weeks based on where we are in the season. This is a potential season-ending injury. That ends up getting changed a little bit this afternoon when interim coach Darren Rizzi speaks to the media, says that Derek Carr won't be placed on IR, so I guess for now that cancels out the season-ending injury part, and said that he hopes Carr can play sooner rather than later, going to leave the door open. They believe he'll be week to week in concussion protocol and having the hand injury, although they didn't talk about the severity outside of the report from Ian Rappaport. So, what does this mean for the Saints? I think next week against the Commanders, you have to assume that Derek Carr is not going to play in that game. You know, just a week removed from that injury seems a little early. And against Washington, you know what? You go for it. You put in one of your backups. You call it a day. After that, though, I do think the Saints have to have a legitimate thought about benching Derek Carr for the rest of the season. And this has nothing to do with performance. This has to do with the fact that Derek Carr does have an injury guarantee for next year. I believe it's a $30 million injury guarantee. I saw that was being talked about yesterday. And this isn't to say that the Saints are going to be tanking per se, but you got to kind of look out for yourself, man. With a $30 million injury guarantee for 2025, I'd be super cautious. We just saw the Giants do the same thing with Daniel Jones before they inevitably ended up cutting him. And although, you know, Derek Carr's situation is a little bit different, he's a better quarterback than Daniel Jones. I do believe where the Saints are right now at this juncture at 5-8, no real great future at the moment, play your cards safe. And while you're at it, if you do sit Derek Carr for this stretch, and it's not like you're benching the dude, he's legitimately hurt at the moment, the Saints get to have a little bit more of a clear, let's say, evaluation on their younger quarterbacks. We've seen Spencer Rattler already play so far this season, and it was pretty messy. And we've seen, you know, Jake Haener have some spot minutes, whether it's against the Chiefs or against the Chargers or even, you know, on Sunday against the Giants, but not a ton from Jake. And what I would say is, although I really have lost my energy to debate who should start with Jake Haener versus Spencer Rattler, because I think the minute we start debating that, we've completely lost the plot, because neither guy is probably going to save the franchise. I do think the Saints should probably give Jake Haener a try here. You've already gone with Rattler. You've seen how it looked. It wasn't great. Doesn't mean that that's who Rattler's going to be. But Jake Haener's in his second year. Next year's going to be year 3. Wouldn't you have to have some type of idea or like to have an idea of what he looks as a starter, whether it's good or god awful? Like, just play him for the last 4 games, see what you got in Jake, at least play him for the next 2 against quality opponents, by the way, Commanders and Packers, and go from there. And at least in a season that does feel lost, if the Saints can come out of this with an idea of whether or not either one of these young quarterbacks are it or aren't at all, that gives you some clarity. And I'm not saying that's going to help the franchise tremendously, but man, it's one less problem to worry about. You know, if one of these guys or both end up stinking up the bed, all right, you know, you need to overhaul this quarterback room anyway, but now it's a little bit more clear than it was a couple weeks ago. And I think for New Orleans, like I said, at 5-8, you need, I'm not a guy who believes in tanking. I can't make that any more clear than I have the last couple weeks, but you need to get an evaluation on these young guys. And while you're kind of out of contention, and I know it says the Saints are in the hunt, but, you know, give me a break. It's not happening. I think against the Commanders and Packers, those are quality opponents. You get to get a good look at some of your young players, see how they step up against 2 teams that are vying for playoff spots. I think that could actually be a bright spot for this team. So it stinks that Derek Carr got hurt, especially on the play where it happens. You know, you're kind of sacrificing your body for extra yardage, trying to, you know, put your team in a position to win. You end up getting hurt. I feel for the dude. That part stinks. He's definitely shown his toughness. There's no question about it. He's battled about 15 different injuries over the last 2 years, but I think the Saints need to be smart. Be smart financially and don't risk the injury guarantee with Derek Carr, and be smart and look at some of these younger guys on your roster. So if the Saints go out there this week and say, hey, Carr's out, we're putting in Jake Haener, I'm cool with it. If the Saints say Carr's out, they're putting in Rattler, I'm cool with it. Like I said, I'm not going to debate over which one of those two guys has to start. If anyone's having a debate about them starting at this point, I mean, that's a you problem. Neither one of them are worth any of us debating or wasting our breath over. That said, the Saints should go that route with the younger quarterback with limited games left and pretty much at 5-8. You're kind of whatever. You're in the standings barely, and no one really expects you to make a run anyway. Go take a look at these younger guys. So we'll see what happens with Derek Carr, not put on IR. We'll see about the severity. It's week to week at the moment. Hopefully the Saints give us some of an update, maybe the next couple of days or so. We'll see what happens. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I want to remind you guys, as always, to leave your thoughts below. Do you believe the Saints should go with Rattler or Haener? Do you want Carr to come back for the end of the season? Let me know, and I can't wait to see what you guys have to say about it. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.